The story that you are about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts, featuring characters, events, or places that has played a role in shaping history. Please sit back and listen as I recite this narrative for you. The Greenbrier Ghost is the name given to the supposed ghost of a young woman murdered in 1897 in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, United States. After hearing testimony from the victim's mother, who believed that her daughter's spirit revealed the true cause of her death, the court eventually ruled that the woman had been murdered by her husband. Elva Zona Heaster Shue was born sometime around 1873 in Greenbrier County. She grew up near Richlands as the middle child with 4 brothers. Not much is known about Zona other than in 1895, she gave birth to a child out of wedlock. There is no other documented information about her baby beyond his or her birth. Erasmus Stribbling Shue, known as Trout, moved to Greenbrier County in 1895. He was in his early 30s. Trout was born in Mussey Creek over Fayette County, who followed in his father, Jacob Shue's footsteps and became a blacksmith. Trout was a mystery according to Greenbrier Ghost stories, since Pocahontas County was portrayed as being a world apart from Greenbrier at that time. He started working as a blacksmith in James Cruikshank's store. It wasn't long before he and Zona crossed paths and soon fell in love even though he was a decade older than her. Trout was married twice before, most recently to a 16-year-old Lucy Ann Tritt, who after 6 months of marriage, died under mysterious circumstances. His first wife was Allie, whom he married in 1885 and had a child named Gerta Lucretia Shue. Legend has it that Trout used to rough up Allie so bad that some of the local boys came into the house one night and dragged Trout from his bed and tossed him in the frozen Greenbrier River. In November of 1896, Zona and Trout was married even though Zona's mother was dead set against the marriage. They lived in Richlands, West Virginia, and by all accounts, Trout was described as a devoted husband and Zona a doting wife. Right after the New Year of 1897, Zona got sick. The cause of her ailment was unknown, and Trout stayed by her side taking care of her. On January 22, 1897, 11 years old Anderson Jones came by after lunch at the Shue's house to check on Zona per Trout's request. There was no answer, so he opened the door and called out again. When he heard no answer, he went in and saw Zona Heaster Shue. She was spread out at the bottom of the stairs, her feet together. One hand was on her stomach while the other lay by her side. Her eyes were wide open and staring, and her head was slightly tilted to one side. Anderson freaked out and ran across the field shouting for help. His mother heard him and came out running. They raced together to Trout and then fetched Dr. George Knapp. When Doc Knapp reached the house, Trout was in the bedroom, cradling the head of his dead wife, inconsolable. After finding her corpse, Trout had dressed her in a fine dress, if somewhat old-fashioned, with a tall, stiff collar, veil over her face, and around her neck, what he said was her favorite scarf. The doctor at first examined Zona for signs of life. Finding none, he made a cursory examination for the cause of death, which seemed to agitate Trout in his grief, and knowing all too well of Zona's ill health, he determined that the cause of death of everlasting faint, which he later changed to childbirth. In other words, miscarriage. Dr. Knapp sent riders to let Mr. and Mrs. Heaster know of their daughter's death. Her body, accompanied by her son-in-law and others from Richlands, followed suit the next day. The funeral was the next day and Trout was still out of his mind with grief. Throughout the wake, he refused to leave his wife's side, spending the majority of the time cradling her head in his arms and keeping a pillow to the side of her face to keep her comfortable. He had folded a sheet for the same reason on the other side of her head. At times, though, Trout would stand up and pace up and down the room, which other people at the wake found suspicious. And as the corpse was being taken to the cemetery, her head seems to flop more than expected. Zona was buried on January 25 in the graveyard of Soli Methodist Church. Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heaster, was convinced that Trout was responsible for the death of her daughter. After the funeral, she had removed the sheet which had been used as her daughter's head prop. Mary Jane tried to return the sheet to Trout, but he refused it, so she took it home. She began washing the sheet by hand and was chilled to see that the water in the basin turned blood red and a foul odor of death emanated from the cloth. The water then cleared, and Mary Jane might have put the incident down to her imagination had she not seen that the sheet was now stained pink. Convinced that it was a sign, Mary Jane began to pray. Each night, she begged for her daughter to come back and tell her the truth about her death. The prayer paid off, and on a dark and moonless West Virginia night, a radiant white light appeared to Mary Jane, which then faded away. On the next night, Zona appeared herself, not as a wispy form, but as flesh and blood, corporeal and cold to the touch. For the next 3 nights, Zona appeared to her mother and told her story. On the night before her body had been discovered, her husband had come home and was pissed off when he saw that she hadn't cooked any meat to go with dinner. The ghost then told her mother that her husband had overpowered her and closed his fingers around her throat in a fit of rage. Trout's rage was so intense that he hadn't just choked his wife to death. Instead, his iron grip smashed her windpipe, ruptured and tore ligaments, and eventually snapped her neck between the first and second vertebrae, fracturing her neck. After relating this story, Zona turned her head towards Mary Jane, fully around on her body, to show her that her neck had been broken, as the apparently reanimated corpse of her murdered daughter made her way towards the door and away from her mother for the last time. Along with her brother-in-law, Mary Jane Heaster paid a visit to the county prosecutor, John Alfred Preston, pleading with him to open the case once more, telling him of the visitation of her daughter. Whether Preston believed Mary Jane is not known, but he had heard the stories which were circulating. After asking around and finding that several people in the area had some suspicions, he spoke with Dr. Knapp. Knapp had been saddened by Zona's death because Trout's grief stopped him from investigating the body as closely as he would have liked, and he told Preston about it. He ordered the corpse to be exhumed, a bold act unheard of in rural West Virginia at that time, based on this knowledge and the word of many locals who had seen bruises on Zona's body. Zona's body was examined on February 22, 1897, in the local one-room schoolhouse. Shue had vigorously complained about this turn of events, but was required by law to be present at the autopsy. He responded that he knew he would be arrested, but no one would be able to prove his guilt. The autopsy lasted 3 days and found that Zona's neck had indeed been broken. According to the report, published on March 9, 1897, the discovery was made that the neck was broken and the windpipe mashed. On the throat were the marks of fingers indicating that she had been choked. The neck was dislocated between the first and second vertebrae. The ligaments were torn and ruptured. The windpipe had been crushed at the point in front of the neck. An inquest was held and Trout Shue was summoned to testify. Although he denied being present at the time of Zona's death and bearing culpability, he was unable to establish an alibi and considered an unreliable, self-serving witness. It was ruled a homicide and Trout Shue was charged with her murder. Awaiting trial, Shue told another inmate that the case would never stand up in court and that he would soon be freed and hoped to eventually marry 7 times. This, of course, came out during the trial as well. Trout Shue's first-degree murder trial began in Greenbrier Circuit Court on June 22, 1897. A panel of 12 jurors was convened who heard evidence from a number of witnesses, including Shue himself. John Preston was reluctant to subpoena Mary Jane Heaster as a witness, fearing her ghost story would damage credibility. However, Shue's defense lawyer opened that can of worms and called Zona's mother to the stand. The defense attacked Mary Jane mercilessly, which backfired as she responded with dignity and stuck to her story. She was just like the people in the jury box. She believed in the power of a mother's intuition just like they did. That the ghost of a murdered girl could appear to her mother was completely believable. And most of all, when a wife is killed, the husband is the natural suspect. The tactic backfired when Mrs. Heaster would not waver in her account despite intense badgering. As the defense had introduced the issue, the judge found it difficult to instruct the jury to disregard the story of the ghost, and many people in the community seemed to believe it. The jury was out for an hour and 10 minutes before returning to find Trout Shue guilty of murdering his wife Zona in the first degree. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and died of an epidemic disease 3 years later on March 13, 1900, and was buried in an unmarked grave in the local cemetery. Mrs. Heaster never recanted her story of her daughter's ghost and died in September 1916. As for Zona, her ghost was never seen in the area again. On January 29, 1979, 2 people were killed while 9 were wounded when Brenda Spencer, 16 years old, opened fire on San Diego's Grover Cleveland Elementary School from her family's house across the street. Born on April 3, 1962, Brenda Ann Spencer lived in the San Carlos neighborhood of San Diego, California, in a house across the street from Grover Cleveland Elementary School in the San Diego Unified School District. Her parents were separated and she shared a home with her father, Wallace Spencer, since she was 9 years old, where they slept on a single mattress on the living room floor in a house littered with discarded alcoholic beverage bottles. Her father was an antisocial loner. At 16, she was 5'2" and had a bright red hair. She describes herself as being gay from birth. People who knew her stated that Spencer expressed hostility toward policemen, had spoken about shooting one, and had talked of doing something big to get on television. Spencer showed exceptional ability as a photographer, winning first prize in a Humane Society competition, but she was uninterested in education in general. She went to Patrick Henry High School, where one teacher recalls asking if she was awake in class on several occasions. Spencer had a damage to the temporal lobe of her brain, which was revealed during examinations while she was in custody. This injury may be from an accident on her bicycle. Neighbors claimed Spencer had a history of petty theft, drug abuse, and truancy. Classmates alleged that the week before the shootings, Spencer said that she wanted to do something big to get on TV. In the early part of 1978, Spencer's parents were informed that she was suicidal by personnel at a facility for troubled students, where she had been referred to for truancy. Spencer was jailed that summer for burglary and shooting out the windows at Cleveland Elementary with a BB pistol. Spencer was advised to be taken to a mental hospital after a psychiatric evaluation performed by her probation officer in December, but her father refused to give his permission. And for Christmas that same year, instead of getting a radio that Spencer asked for, her father gave her a Ruger 10-22 semi-automatic 22 caliber rifle with telescopic sight and 500 rounds of ammunition. When she was asked why she thought her father gave her that, her reply was, "I felt like he wanted me to kill myself." Spencer positioned herself near a window in her home on the morning of January 29, 1979, and began shooting across the street toward the school as youngsters waited for Principal Burton Ragg to open the gate. Police were dispatched right away. They soon found themselves risking their own lives in order to save others. As the indiscriminatory gunfire continued, officers were able to commandeer a garbage truck and use that as a shield to drive into the line of fire to be able to rescue innocent children, and as a result, countless lives were saved. Spencer's shooting spree ended 16 minutes later. She injured 8 children. Burton Ragg was killed while trying to help the children. Custodian Mike Sukar was killed while trying to pull Ragg to safety. A police officer, Robert Robb, responding to a call for assistance during the incident, was shot in the neck as he arrived. Spencer's residence was surrounded by SWAT and the emergency negotiations team after she fired 30 bullets. While in there, she spoke by telephone to a reporter from the San Diego Union Tribune who had been randomly calling telephone numbers in the neighborhood. Spencer told the reporter she had shot at the school children and adults because "I don't like Mondays. This livens up the day." She also told police negotiators that children and adults whom she had shot were easy targets and that she would come out shooting. During the standoff, Spencer stated that she targeted anyone who was wearing blue, her favorite color, and those in feather-down filled coats because she liked to see the feathers fly as the bullets hit them. The primary negotiator, Officer Paul Olson, spoke with Spencer on and off by phone for hours, urging her to throw out her gun and surrender. Officer Olson stated that Spencer told him things like having shot a rabbit in the back of its head from 25 yards. She said the school victims looked like a herd of cows for gathering around the wounded, making them easy pickings. She ultimately surrendered peacefully after being promised a Burger King meal at 2:30 p.m., laying her .22 rifle and a pellet rifle on the ground, then boxes of ammunition. Though the authorities found beer and whiskey bottle cluttered around the house, Spencer did not appear to be intoxicated when she was arrested. The entire siege lasted 7 hours. Due to the seriousness of her crime, Spencer was tried as an adult and ultimately pled guilty to 2 counts of murder and assault with a deadly weapon. She was sentenced to prison for 25 years to life. In prison, Spencer was diagnosed as an epileptic and received medication to treat her epilepsy and depression. While at the California Institution for Women in Chino, California, she worked repairing electronic equipment. Spencer claimed in 1993 that she opened fire while under the influence of PCP and alcohol, and that the state and her counsel conspired to conceal her drug test findings. Spencer's attorney, Michael McGlean, and former prosecutor Charles Patrick both fiercely denied that any evidence in her case had been withheld. She had been denied release 4 times by the parole board as of December 2015. Spencer claimed during her first hearing that she had hoped police would shoot her and that she had been a heavy drinker and drug user at the time of the crime, despite the fact that drug tests performed after she was arrested came up negative. Spencer first alleged in her 2001 hearing that her father had been abusing her by beating her and sexually abusing her, but he denied the charges. Because she had not previously informed any prison employees about the charges, the parole board chairman questioned whether they were true. Her father went on to marry Spencer's 17-year-old juvenile hall cellmate, but they later divorced. He died at age 87 in 2016. In 2005, a deputy district attorney in San Diego referenced a self-harm event that occurred 4 years before Spencer's girlfriend was freed from jail as evidence that she was insane and unfit to be released. Scratching the phrases "courage" and "pride" into her own skin is a typical form of self-harm. However, Spencer corrected this during her parole hearing as runes, reading "Unforgiven" and "Alone." In 2009, the board denied her application for parole, stating that she would have to wait 10 years before being considered again. In September 2021, she will be eligible for a parole suitability hearing. She is still incarcerated at the California Institution for Women as of June 2021. After this event, the bizarre trait of mass killing continues in the United States. Since 2009, there have been 288 school shootings in America. Spencer was cited as the inspiration for the song "I Don't Like Mondays," written by Bob Geldof for his band the Boomtown Rats, which was released later that year. Geldof and his band were in San Diego performing at the Roxy Theater, a small movie theater and concert hall in the Pacific Beach part of town on February 27, 1979, and the preliminary legal proceeding against Spencer were headlining local news broadcasts. "I Don't Like Mondays" was also the title of a 2006 television documentary about the event. Hey everyone! I just wanted to express how grateful I am that you took the time to listen to my narration. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I am Twysted Mind and please enjoy the rest of your day. Salamat!